Hello everybody, this is Ralph Martin from RJ Quality Consulting, and in this video I want to talk about the ISO 17025 requirements as they pertain to required policies and procedures. As many of you know, I'm a certified ISO 17025 auditor and consultant, and I also get a lot of questions. Basically, what are the required policies and procedures to meet the requirements of the ISO IEC 17025 standard? Now, in order to answer that question, because I have had a lot of emails and people asking this, there are phrases in the standard where the standard will specifically say the laboratory shall have a procedure for or whatever, and that procedure shall include like A through H or some verbiage like that. There are 11 of those. Two of those are the standard doesn't actually use the word procedure. The standard uses the word, for example, in section 7.9, it says that the laboratory shall have a documented process for, and that's customer complaints. The other one is the laboratory shall have a internal audit plan. Doesn't actually use the word procedure. And then on top of that, there are a handful of required policies and one required set of objectives. So that what I decided to do was create a blog article describing what the required procedures are that include this audit plan and customer complaint written process, and then compiled a blog article containing those items and then required policies that is required by the standard. These are documents that a ISO 17025 auditor will ask you for, and if you don't have it, they will give you a nonconformity. So if you happen to be watching this video on YouTube, what you can do is just click on the link in the description box, and you could read my full blog article on the subject. But what I'll do in this video is walk you through the blog article and go over what these requirements actually are. So the standard does establish a framework for required procedures and policies. And what I have done is I've broken these required procedures and policies into clause element structure so that you know where in the standard do you find these requirements. So I'll start off with the first required one. Like I said, there is 11 required procedures, if you will, that you should have in your procedure arsenal to satisfy a 17025 auditor. If you are getting ready to get an accreditation audit, either an initial accreditation assessment, or you're coming up with a reaccreditation assessment or a surveillance assessment, or you're just wanting to do an internal audit. So first required procedure comes in section 6.2.5 of the standard, and that is the personnel procedure. So this is a training procedure. Basically, this requirement focuses on staff qualifications and ongoing training. Section 6.25 does mandate documented processes detailing roles, responsibilities, and competency assessments. And it does use the verbiage procedure. So just to give you an idea on what the actual standard does say, because as you know, if you've seen any of my other videos, I always refer to the Bible, the standard, right? The ISO 17025 standard. If you go down to section 6.25, if you don't believe me that this is a required procedure, you'll see here, as plain as day, let me get to the actual word procedure. Here we go. Section 6.2.5. The laboratory shall have procedures and retain records for, and then it tells you that these items need to be, you need to have procedures for and retain records for. So this infers that you need a procedure. You could have a separate procedure for A, B, C, D, E, F, but that would be stupid. The lab would create a training procedure with these required elements in that procedure. And then basically, if you don't have a training procedure or this particular procedure, I recommend creating one and just make sure that you cover all of the requirements in section 6.2. That's how you would go about writing this procedure. You would write it. You know you need a procedure because it says laboratory shall have a procedure. Then you go to this section in 6.2 and just ensure that the procedure contains all the requirements of section 6.2. That's how you write procedures for the quality standard. So getting back to the blog article, the next required section. I just wanted to use that as an example. The whole standard is written like this for each of these sections I'm going through. The next required procedure is equipment maintenance procedure. In section 6.43, it dictates that labs maintain equipment through scheduled checks, preventive maintenance, and proper calibration, and that you have a procedure for equipment maintenance. Now, during a lot of audits that I perform for laboratories, one of the things I get from laboratory personnel is something to the effect of, well, we have procedures. Each instrument of ours has a corresponding procedure on how to run the instrument. That is not an equipment maintenance procedure. The intent of the standard is for you to have one overarching procedure that describes your equipment maintenance and calibration program that you put into place for all of your equipment holistically. That's what the procedures or the requirements intent is. Don't just tell the auditor, oh yeah, I have procedures. Each of my pieces of equipment have some sort of manual that gives procedures. So I have procedures. Don't do that. You will get a nonconformance from the auditor and you will probably tick him off. So I would recommend just write a procedure, and again, go to section 6.4 of the standard, write a procedure, and just make sure you have all of the requirements that are in section 6.4 in that procedure, and that you have the corresponding required documentation, such as an equipment list. I mean, there's more ways than just an equipment list. Most labs will have like a big spreadsheet that is a master equipment list, and then they have all of the required elements that need to be in your equipment records, which you can find those requirements in section 6.4 and point to them from your procedure that you will write. So that is the second required procedure. Third required procedure is a procedure for externally provided products and services per section 6.6.2 of the standard. And it specifically says a laboratory shall have a procedure for externally provided products and services. And that procedure shall include, and then it has a variety of things, one of those being an approved vendor list and a way of scoring your vendors or rating your vendors. So again, to write a procedure like this, you would go to section 6.6 of the standard and just make sure your procedure includes all of the requirements of section 6.6. Then we move on to section 7.1. This is a real common nonconformity, by the way. I see a lot of labs that just don't have this procedure. A lot of labs don't understand this section, so they just don't write a procedure for it. It's pretty easy to understand. You just read it. It's a review of requests, tenders, and contracts procedure. This is the process of a customer wants you to run a sample for them, right? That's what it is, right? How do they communicate what they want from you when they send you a sample? That communication is or process is a process. Therefore, it needs to be according to ISO standards, it needs to be a procedure. You need to have a procedure describing the process by which a customer wants you to run tests for them, and how that's documented, and how the laboratory takes that information in and goes ahead and runs the test that the customer wants them to run. That's what they mean by, and that's what is referred to as a request. It's a customer request to run tests or calibrations, depending on whether you are a testing lab or a calibration lab. Then the next required procedure, and this is not necessarily one procedure, but you need to have test methods and procedures for your actual tests or calibrations that you perform. This is kind of a no-brainer, but I stuck this in there because the standard does say the laboratory is required to have test methods and procedures for the actual work that they do, such as, heavy metal analysis by ICP-MS. That would be a procedure, right? Or whatever test method that is in the scope of your accreditation. Each laboratory has a different scope, so these methods would apply to whatever it is you do as a laboratory, whether you're a testing laboratory, a calibration laboratory, or sampling laboratory. So that is kind of maybe a group of tests, maybe not one test. Then what's required is a validation procedure in conformance with Section 7.2. Whether you are doing standard methods or whether you're doing in-house methods, you need to have some sort of validation procedure. If you're doing in-house methods, then you need a full method validation in conjunction with a validation procedure. So basically the standard says that you shall have you shall perform method validations in accordance with a procedure. So there is validation procedure required even if you perform standard methods like ASTM methods. You will need to have a procedure that validates the fact that you can perform that test method and get the accurate, get the correct results, essentially. Then the next required procedure is handling of test or calibration items. Again, depending on whether you are a calibration lab or a testing lab, this would indicate a handling of test items procedure or a handling of calibration items procedure, depending on whether you're a calibration lab or a testing lab. Then monitoring the validity of results procedure, which is basically a quality control procedure, how you monitor the validity of your results. This also includes proficiency testing. Section 7.7 of the standard, again, to create a procedure like this, you would go to Section 7.7 and create a procedure and capture all of the required clause elements of this section. Next one is non-conforming work. This is a required procedure where the standard says the laboratory shall have a procedure for non-conforming work in accordance with Section 7.10. This can be loosely tied with your corrective action process. Although the standard does not require a corrective action procedure, you can meet Section 8.7 of the standard, which is corrective action, by embedding it into your non-conforming work procedure. My recommendation is when you create this procedure, you meet all the requirements of Section 7.10 and Section 8.7 when you write that procedure. Then we have number 10 is a documented process for complaints. This is where the standard doesn't technically use the word procedure, but it does say the laboratory shall have a documented process for handling customer complaints. And then, again, the standard doesn't use the actual formal word procedure, but the standard does require a written internal audit plan. And in this case, the standard requires that you have an internal audit plan and that you conduct internal audits in a planned manner. So that's kind of the verbiage it used. And then I show key elements of what that internal audit plan should have according to Section 8.8 of the standard. Then, in addition to the required procedures, there are required lab policies I just call them lab policies, but this would also include quality objectives. And really, I've identified four of them. There is the ISO 17025 quality policy. You need to have a quality policy. In fact, you need to have a quality policy and discuss that in management review. You also need to have an impartiality policy, and then I stipulate what the requirements of that policy are. You can go to section 4.1 of the standard, and it'll tell you the specific requirements for the impartiality policy. Then we have a confidentiality policy and requirements for a confidentiality policy spelled out in section 4.2 of the standard, and then quality objectives. Now, the requirements for quality objectives are really in section 8.2 of the standard, where it talks about required policies and objectives. Also, in section 8.9 of the standard, where we talk about management review, there is a specific a required input where you are required to discuss your quality objectives, inferring that you need some sort of document that lists your quality objectives, and quality objectives need to be measurable, not just some vague, we want to do good. I'm talking about measurable quality objectives, like we want to have a 95% on-time delivery of test reports. That is a measurable quality objective. You either meet that or you don't meet that. And when you don't meet it, you take measures to improve. That's the whole idea of quality objectives, is that you implement improvement measures to meet or exceed your quality objectives. So, make sure you study section 8.2 of the standard, and also section 8.9 when it comes to management review, because a lot of these required policies and procedures are within the required inputs and outputs of the management review requirement, where it tells you what you are required to discuss and take notes on within your management review meetings that you hold at bare minimum once a year. So those are the required policies and procedures. I have also listed highly recommended procedures and documentation. Although, for example, the standard doesn't technically require a quality manual, should you have one? Definitely yes. You should have a quality manual, and that should be in the same clause structural alignment as the standard itself. If you want to make your auditor happy and not make him kind of, hard for him to do your audit and put him in a good mood, have a quality manual that's in alignment with the quality standard, same clause structure. That way he knows how you meet all the requirements of the standard, because he's going to use an internal audit or an external audit checklist that has all the clause elements on a checklist, and he's going to check every single one. If you have a quality manual that's aligned that way, you make his job a lot easier. He's more apt to not give you nonconformities because he'll be in a better mood. Believe me, I know this because I am an auditor, right? It's frustrating when you're looking at a laboratory's quality manual, and the requirements for section 4.1 are in their section 9.8. It's extremely complicated, especially when the lab doesn't know what section of their quality manual meets section 4.1, blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean? It's like you need to make life easy for yourselves when you're doing an internal audit, where you know what areas of your management system meet what clause elements of the standard. And it's easy to train your employees on how to do that by having your quality manual in the same clause element structure as the standard. 4.1, impartiality. 4.2, confidentiality. 8.9, management review. But right in alignment with the standard. If you're not familiar with the standard and you're seeking ISO 17025, go out and buy the standard. If you don't get the standard, you're not serious about getting accredited to ISO 17025. Yes, you do have to read the standard. Best way to read the standard is to create a quality manual in alignment with the standard. So that being said, go ahead and read this article. I just wanted to also let you know, it could be a lot of work to write all of these procedures. Now, I have created and I'll share my screen, pre-formatted required procedures for any laboratory. I have created them in such a way where you can insert your laboratory's name and customize it for your lab. I've also created a quality manual. It's I'll open it for you. Here's the quality manual. It's actually a template, and it will, once I open it here, it is aligned with the clause element structure of the standard for sure. And it's a 59 pages. You just insert the laboratory name here, and here's the table of contents, and I literally give you the required policies and procedures. You just insert laboratory name. It goes over every clause element of the standard, and when it does get to, and there's like section 5, you would insert your organization chart, and structure of the organization, range of activities, all the things that the standard requires. When it does get to a required procedure, like for example 6.2.5, I believe it is, I say the laboratory has a documented personnel competence training procedure, and that procedure references to the appendices of this document, and I list all the procedures. And I do this for every section of the quality manual, and I do that for all of the required procedures I just went over in this blog post. Now if you go to the very bottom, one of the appendices, I think it's the first appendices, I give you a list of reference documents and procedures, and it gives you impartiality agreement, confidentiality policy for contractors, personnel competence and training procedure, all of the ones that were referenced in the appropriate section above in the quality manual. And then I also have as an appendices a revision history that you would keep track of revisions. And then I also include the required procedures. So for example, here's an externally provided products and services procedure. Again, you just insert the name of the lab. Here's a complete procedure for externally provided products and services meeting the requirements of section 6.6. And I have everything for you. And also in the appendices of each procedure is a required form that you could use to fill out to have objective evidence and a record of what that procedure requires. I do that for every single procedure. I think there's 15 of them, and I do include the recommended procedures in addition to the required policies and procedures. They're all here, and how you're probably wondering how much this cost. And the quality manual itself, I charge $49 for, and it includes everything that you saw in the quality manual without the procedures, and you can write your own procedures. But it does tell you what the required procedures are. Then it comes with an optional upgrade for another $49, and you get all of the required procedures and policies with the applicable forms embedded into the appendices of each applicable procedure. For a total of $98, you get a complete quality management system that you could use, and then you can even go to my website and then download my free internal audit checklist, implement the policies and procedures that you purchased from me, and then do a gap analysis, and then do an internal audit. I also have a management review, because you need a management review and you need an internal audit to give to your accreditation body before they'll even come out and audit you. So in my management review procedure in this package, you also get a management review template that you follow to conduct your management review. Then you'll have all the required policies and procedures, You'll have all the forms that you need for objective evidence. You'll have an internal audit performed by getting my free internal audit checklist, which you could use as an internal audit record. It is auditable, and it would pass an audit. As you know, I'm an auditor, so I audit these things. And then you'll have a management review template that you can use, which also meets all the requirements of the standard. So if you want a do-it-yourself process for creating your own required procedures and policies, I've left a link at the bottom of this video on this blog page. Or if you're getting it from YouTube and you're watching the video straight from YouTube, I'll drop a link in the description box to where you can purchase the quality manual and then upgrade to the procedures. Total of $98, you get all of the required documentation for ISO 17025. And then you also have me available if you want to email me and ask questions. That's one of the services I provide. And I also provide other services. If you basically want me to carry you across the finish line and guarantee that you get accredited, I can do that. Whatever you want to do. If you want to set up a free 45-minute consultation with me, I've also provided a link for that, and you can do that, and then we can discuss. You have me for 45 minutes to discuss anything ISO 17025 related. So that's it, my friends. This is Ralph Martin signing out. You make it a great day. Take care.